Welcome back.
Welcome back to the Tough Questions for God
message.
Daily Devotion.
Tough Questions for God is all about developing faith without all of the buildings and judgment and pews and things that we're used to. So check it out at toughquestionsforgod.org.
Last week we started a short journey together with a message series that I titled Alice. And if you remember, it was about last week we talked about how my mom grew up, and Alice was an African-American lady that went in and joined the family, and it was just a tragic story. And at 13, when my mom and the other siblings had lost both of their parents, Alice stepped up to the platform and took care of these kids, for a while there in Savanah, Georgia, and racism all over the place. And when I say racism, I'm talking about the way that our heart looks at people sometimes. Maybe all of us probably would say, well, I'm not racist. But when we look at another individual, are we looking at that individual as the same way God looks at that person? That's the question. And we're going to continue on that journey today. I've got a short video clip. Maybe you've seen this before. The internet is a wonderful thing, but check this out, that hurt. Okay? And sometimes we look at people and we devalue people. Sometimes we even make the mistake like that young man did. And did you catch his comment? Do you know how much a slave cost back then? I can't imagine that coming out of the heart of a person who loves God. I just cannot fathom that to save my life. But we all look at people sometimes, myself included, and sometimes, maybe in the past, there's been people that you shy away from, or people that maybe deserved an opportunity that you didn't give them. I mean, there's all kinds of, we could go around the room and come up with a whole list of things, but I want to continue our journey today of looking at the issue of the human heart and how we view people. And do we view people in the same way that God views people? Do we look at people and see the value that God has placed in that individual? Well, today we're going to look at another individual. And again, I'm trying to do this with a sense of compassion, and a sense of justice, and just the way that God does things. Today we're going to look at the story about a man by the name of Pierre Toussaint. Anybody ever heard of him? Pierre Toussaint was born in what is now modern-day Haiti. But back then, he was born in 1766, a long time ago. And things were much different there than they are today. In some ways, in other ways it's not. Toussaint was born on the island of Saint Dominique. Again, today's modern-day Haiti. And we don't really know a whole lot about his early life. But we know that he was born onto and stayed in and lived in a plantation on that island. He was a slave. He was born into it. And back then, that was acceptable. Well, Toussaint has a very interesting story I'm gonna share with you today. On the island, as a slave, as a young boy, he became their house boy, is what they call him, or house slave. And what he did was he lived in the house and he did chores and helped with the kids and all those wonderful things. Well, what happened back then in the 1700s was if you were a slave owner and you had a plantation and all that, then you would import or bring in people to educate your children. And they did. Well, Toussaint, as the houseboy for this family, he had the opportunity to be educated alongside of them. They encouraged him to do that. What a blessing. What a blessing for him. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, isn't it interesting the way that God orchestrates things for people's lives in ways that we don't even see it, man? I mean, the way he gave Toussaint this opportunity to learn right along with this white family. So anyway, he was being educated at the same time. And again, back in the mid to late 1700s, one of the things that was very popular amongst people that were affluent was you would develop a library. And they did. the plantation owner, he had a library there in his house, and it was filled with all kinds of documents and books and things of that nature. A lot of it was Christian based. A lot of it referenced Catholicism. Well, Toussaint also had free access to all that, and he utilized it. He read and he read and he read, and he developed a very deep Christian faith based on many of the sermons and the writings that he read in that library that were written by some French theologians and professors and things. So it was one of those things that Toussaint had in his life that he took advantage of, and rightfully so. Well, anyway, we'll fast forward a little bit. In 1787, the political situation on the island became so difficult that the plantation owner and his family, they were forced to leave. They had to go because of the turmoil politically that was taking place. So what happened was the plantation owner grabbed his family and he took Toussaint and he took 4 other of his slaves. And where did they end up? Where did people end up? New York. New York, right? So they end up in New York, and it was a difficult journey, a difficult transition for them, but they started to get themselves reestablished in New York, but then about a year after they got there, the plantation owner himself died very suddenly. And all of a sudden, his wife and kids and these 5 slaves that he brought from St. Dominique were penniless. They had nothing in New York. Well, sometimes you simply have to trust in the things that God allows to take place in your life. I mean, when you think about it, sometimes you just have to say, God, I don't understand what's going on. I certainly don't like it. I certainly don't see where this is going, but you just gotta trust in where God is leading. It's so hard. Well, anyway, so Toussaint is sitting there faced with this situation where this wife is destitute and everybody else is kind of destitute. But back then in New York, one of the professions that was available to African Americans and was accepted in society back then was to be a barber or a hairdresser. And the guy was good at it. The guy was fantastic at it. So Toussaint started doing hair, and he was traveling around New York, and he ended up supporting the widow and her children and the others that came with him. He supported them all. He didn't have to. But this poor woman who had shown him kindness and as he was the houseboy there in St. Dominique, all of a sudden she's got nothing and she's got these kids, and he had the opportunity to help. He did. He did. Isn't it unbelievable? This guy would offer what he's earning to support this family that, quote, enslaved him. It's phenomenal. Well, it was a couple of years later, after all this was taking place, that she was ill, and she decided to emancipate Toussaint. So she did. And he went off and continued to earn money and continued to take care of her kids and continued to take care of the others that went with him. He never missed a beat. Never missed a beat. And he ended up, I don't know all the particulars about how it was arranged, but he ended up using some of the income that he had and he was getting to pay for the freedom of the other slaves that came with him, while continuing to support the kids that had been orphaned. And this is It's like, God, why? All this craziness is going on. Why it just doesn't make sense. Well, she ended up passing away. And like I said, he took care of the kids and all of that. And he was emancipated and he was doing hair in New York. And he became so well known that the upper echelon, so to speak, were clamoring for him. He was well known, well paid. One of the most prominent socialites in New York at the time made this statement about Toussaint. She said, as a hairdresser for ladies, he was unrivaled. And they paid for it. And he benefited from it. Thanks to his income, thanks to his frugal lifestyle, thanks to some of the investments that he made, he was able to buy his own house in 1811. African-American guy, New York City, how many could actually buy their own house? Basically none. But he was able to buy his own house. And again, he purchased that freedom for, the other slaves and all. He utilized the income that God gives him this talent. He's utilizing this to help other people. Now, the work of a hairdresser in New York in the early 1800s was hard, very tough. Yes, it was financially rewarding. Yes, he was in demand, but it played a huge toll on his health because he had to go all over the city doing this stuff. He spent sometimes 16 hours a day working and traveling before he'd get home and get some rest and some food. Then he could get up early in the morning and start it all over again. Let's talk about transportation back then. Back then, of course, the way that you got around New York City was what? Horses and buggies. That's how you did it. However, in 1811, African Americans were not allowed to do that. They had to walk. So Toussaint, even though he's well known, even though he's well respected as a hairdresser and people are clamoring for his services, he's got to walk in order to get from this one to way over there to that one, and on and on and on. I mentioned to you, too, that in the library on St. Dominique Island, he developed a very deep religious faith. And so when he was in New York, one of the things he did every single morning, 7 days a week, was he attended the service at 6 a.m. at St. Peter's Cathedral every day. That's how he started his day off. He wanted to start this long and difficult day with God. It reminds me of when you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing that should come to your mind? What's the first thing that should be evident? Is God, I want to rely on you today. I don't know where we're going. I got all kinds of plans, but you know what? If they're not your plans, then shut the door and I'm ready to go with you. I mean, these are the things that we need to remember. And Toussaint reminded himself of that by traveling early in the morning to St. Peter's Cathedral at 6 a.m. Now that church is long gone, but it has been rebuilt with a stone and it's still there today. Toussaint, because of the income that he was earning, he also was one of the major benefactors of St. Peter's. I mean, his story gets crazier and crazier as it goes on. Here's this African-American guy with all these opportunities, making money, very much in demand, and he's now using a lot of that not only to benefit other people, but to help this church thrive. It's unimaginable. He had a favorite charity also that he was well known for. It was called St. Patrick's Orphan Asylum. He had a heart for people who had nothing. He had a heart for kids that had lost family. They were kind of orphaned on their own. It could have been because of poverty. It could have been because of disease. It could have been because of their deaths, whatever the case might be. But The orphanage asylum was basically filled with kids that had nowhere else to go. And Toussaint said, you know what, I can't turn my back on them. And he financially was one of their biggest supporters. Can you imagine what it must have been like in New York back then as a well-known African-American guy making all this money? There was so much opposition to him. People were like, you don't deserve this. Who do you think you are? And yet, the socialites are like, come to my hero. We got a big party tonight. Whatever. But he utilized the resources that God had given to him to honor God. In his outreach to kids through the orphanage, he also opened his own doors of the house that he bought to orphans also, because many times the orphanage was full. So Toussaint and his wife, who was one of the ones he bought her freedom and he married her, they never had kids of their own. So they opened their doors to the overflow, so to speak, from the orphanage and to other kids that were found that had nowhere to go. And it didn't make any difference if you were black, if you were white, if you were purple, or if you had checkerboard. It didn't make any difference at all. Toussaint's doors were open to everybody. Is that where we are? You got to ask the question. Well, Toussaint also, you guys ever heard of yellow fever? Yellow fever was nasty. There's the picture of the orphanage from many, many years ago. Yellow fever back then was a horrible disease. And when I read about this part of Toussaint's life, it just made me realize that when you're, I don't want to say it, when you're doing God's will, He will protect you. Toussaint also opened his door. And if you had yellow fever back then, many times you were, in order not to infect the rest of the family, you were alienated, you were out on the streets. Many of those people on the streets with yellow fever were younger adults or kids. And Toussaint opened his doors to them too. And he and his wife cared for many, many kids that had yellow fever. It's just an unbelievable story. So Toussaint, later in life, is urged to think about his retirement years, right? Hey, you're getting old now, and you've been doing this for many, many years. And, are you going to retire? What are you thinking about the future? This is what he said. He said, I have enough for myself, but if I stop working, I have not enough for others. I have not enough for other people. You see, all the people that God placed in his life were as important to him, actually more important than his own comfort or his own life. He felt the call of God to bless other people through the blessings that God had given to him. He knew where he was. He knew he had tremendous opportunities that many other African Americans didn't have at the time. But he was a godly man. And he believed in what he read. He believed in his faith. And he said, I'm going to follow to the best of my ability. And I'm going to share. And I'm going to do my absolute best to emulate the life of Jesus here in New York City in the early 1800s. That's what he decided to do. Wow. I admire the heck out of this guy. The way he lived and he sacrificed. The things he chose to do. See, that's the thing. We all have choices in life, all of us. What are we choosing? What are you choosing? What am I choosing? What am I going to choose today that I'll look back on and say, oh, that was a good choice? Or what am I going to look back on today and say, oh, messed that one up? See, in the end, what makes any difference? It's really what you chose to do in your life, and also who you chose to forgive. What else makes any difference? I want us to remember it. And there's a couple more sessions of this series on Alice that we'll get into, but not right away. But I do want us to remember that people, whether it's like Alice that we talked about last week, or it's Pierre Toussaint that we're talking about today, it's all about the choices that we make in life. What are we choosing? I mean, yeah, we all want to take care of ourselves. We all want to live a good life and be happy, and we want to do good things, and we want to be remembered well, and all that wonderful stuff. But it really gets down to our own personal choices. It really does. So right now you're probably thinking, okay, Joe, where's all this going? That's really nice. Well, one of the questions I get asked a lot over the years, and even before I was in pastoral ministry, I remember doing prison ministry, and I was asked this by a lot of inmates actually. And they said, what am I here for? What's the plans God has for my life? Am I even on the right track? What does God want me to do? Have any of you guys asked that question? Ask it of yourself, ask it of God during your prayer time or your meditation time. And if you're not doing that, you need to do it. Have you considered what it is that God really wants me to do? Man, I've been asked that lots and lots of times. Well, I'm going to show you what God wants you to do. It's very simple. You ever heard of the book of Micah? Probably not been in it lately. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. Toussaint was doing everything he could to follow this command of God. You want to know what he wants? That's what he wants. Walk humbly with him. Love kindness. And kindness overlooks the fact that many times people don't give you kindness in return. You ever look at somebody and say, well, I'm not, that guy's a jerk, or that guy's mean, I'm not going over there, No. You see, the key is, do we see people through the same eyes that God sees them? Do we value people in the same way that God values people? Do we value people, and are we willing to put ourselves on the line, like Pierre Toussaint, or like Alice, or like many other examples I'll share with you later? Are we willing to be the person that puts our faith in action? True action. That really is the dilemma. And again, as a church, as a congregation, as a new emerging Methodist church, so to speak, here in Riverton Township, these are the questions we need to consider. What is it that we are about? What are we going to do? And how are we going to do it? I admire this story about Toussaint because, to me, it's very personal. I grew up in D.C., and D.C. was not the most, what's the word I'm looking for, unoppressive place sometimes. It was very segregated at times. And it was a difficult journey sometimes when it comes to the way that you grow up and the way that you relate to and you see other people. And I'm just being honest with you. Hard journey for everybody. And I think whether you grew up in D.C. or you grew up out here or wherever it is, we are all faced with looking at people that are different than us. And then we have to say, okay, how am I going to see that person? Am I going to see them for, their outward appearance, or am I going to see them for, they're like me or they're not like me? Or am I just going to put all that aside and say, God, how do you see this individual? And can I see them the same way? That's what makes all the difference. Are we willing to do that? Do we want to do that? There's another major key. Lead the horse to water, but if he doesn't want to drink, not happening. You can lead people to a church. But if they don't want to promote it, it won't happen. You can put a person in line at Meijer with somebody that's struggling. And if you want to help them, you will. If you don't, you don't. You see, there's choices everywhere, aren't there? I've got more to share with you about the way we look at people and this aspect of racism, so to speak, in the world and in our culture and many of the changes, but we won't be getting into those until probably January. Next week, I'm going to be starting a series for Advent, whatever it is, you know. And the series is titled Scrooge.
Check out the toughquestionsforgod.org website, and we'll see you tomorrow for Daily Devotions. Take care.